A rich businesswoman walks into a busy train station and sees two scared little kids sitting alone with a torn backpack when she learns why they're there. It breaks her heart and leads to a fight that will leave you in tears. You won't believe how this story ends. So don't miss a second, dear friend. What you're about to experience is not just a story. It's a deeply human journey about loss, resilience, and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances and the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now, let's begin. It started on a gray, rain-slick morning at Grand Central Station, a place where tens of thousands of strangers brushed past each other without a glance. Evelyn Hart, a 47-year-old self-made millionaire, moved through the throng with the certainty of a woman who'd conquered every challenge life threw at her. Her sleek black heels clicked against the marble floors as she rehearsed mental notes for a board meeting that could reshape her company's future. Her thoughts were on revenue forecasts and international partnerships until she saw them. A flash of red caught her eye, a battered backpack resting at the feet of two children, so small and still they looked like lost dolls propped on the station's cold bench. One girl, maybe 6, clutched her brother's hand as if he were the only solid thing in her universe. Their hair was damp with mist from the rain outside, their eyes red-rimmed and fixed on the flood of travelers who never slowed, never saw them. Evelyn's first instinct was to walk past. She was late. She had shareholders to answer to. And yet, she couldn't shake the look on the girl's face, a haunting mix of hope and dread that made Evelyn's chest tighten. She turned back. She stepped closer. "Sweethearts, where are your parents?" Evelyn's voice came out softer than she expected, as though some long-forgotten part of herself had awakened. The girl's head jerked up, her blue eyes wide and frightened. "They said they'd come back," she whispered. Her voice was so small it nearly dissolved in the echoing station. "But it's been so long." In that instant, Evelyn felt a crack open inside her, a place she'd kept sealed since she was a little girl herself, watching her mother leave and never come back. A place where the terror of abandonment lived. She looked around, expecting to see a frantic parent rushing toward them. But there was no one. People hustled by, eyes glued to phones or timetables, oblivious to two children frozen in fear. The station felt colder, the silence around the children louder. Evelyn's mind raced with questions. Who would leave their kids alone in one of the busiest train stations in the world? What had happened to their parents? Could this be a misunderstanding or something far worse? She crouched in front of them, ignoring the way her designer skirt pulled at the seams. "My name is Evelyn. I want to help you. Can you tell me your names?" The girl hesitated before answering in a thin, trembling voice. "I'm Ella. This is Noah." The boy, barely 5, didn't speak. He just pressed his face into his sister's shoulder, his small body shaking. Evelyn reached out her hand, hovering over theirs. "I'm so glad you told me your names," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "You're very brave." A security guard nearby caught sight of the scene and stepped over. "Ma'am, do you know these children?" he asked, suspicion threading his tone. Evelyn could feel eyes turning toward them, curious strangers slowing their steps. A knot of panic rose in her chest. She realized how this might look, a powerful woman in an expensive coat hovering over two alone children. "No," she said quickly, "but they need help." The children's backpack told its own story, frayed straps, a broken zipper, and inside a note written on a crumpled receipt, Ella and Noah Morgan. No phone, no address. That was it. A few scribbled words left with two terrified kids, as though that could substitute for a parent's love. She felt her vision blur as tears welled in her eyes. Evelyn Hart had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, but the sight of that note, so careless, so final, brought her to her knees. In that moment, she realized something no balance sheet could measure: the pure, devastating cost of a child's trust shattered by an adult who promised they'd never leave. She thought of how easy it would be for someone else to keep walking, to decide this wasn't their problem. How many people had passed already? For Evelyn, this wasn't a problem to be avoided. It was a calling. The children's wide eyes, the way Ella kept glancing at the entrance as if willing her parents to appear, each detail tore deeper into Evelyn's heart. She took a shaky breath, pulling herself together even as she fought the tremor in her hands. "I won't leave you," she promised, her voice fierce with a conviction she hadn't felt in years. That morning, Evelyn Hart had walked into Grand Central thinking about her company's future. But by the time she rose from that bench, she was already wondering how she could build a future for two children who had no one else. This encounter was more than chance. It was a moment designed to test who she truly was. And though Evelyn didn't yet know the heartbreaking secrets these children carried, she knew one thing with absolute clarity: she was going to stay. She was going to fight. She was going to become someone they could count on. Because sometimes in the most ordinary places, a single moment can split your life into before and after. And the choice you make decides not just your fate, but the fate of those who need you most. She looked into Ella's tearful eyes, squeezed Noah's tiny shoulder, and felt the weight of a promise she could never break. And as she stood scanning the endless tide of travelers who never paused, Evelyn knew she had crossed a threshold she could never come back from. Before she took the children's hands in hers, she glanced once more at the arrivals board overhead, its letters flipping in an endless rhythm. It was a reminder that time never stops, that moments slip by, that sometimes you only get one chance to do what's right. And as they stepped together into the swirling chaos of Grand Central, Evelyn felt something profound stir in her soul, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she needed to be. Now, as Evelyn begins to uncover the painful truth behind why these children were left alone, she finds herself caught in a battle she never expected. Because what she's about to learn will change not just their lives, but hers forever. The train station's constant hum surrounded Evelyn as she held Ella and Noah close, but a louder noise roared in her mind. What had happened to these children? What terrible choice had left them here with nothing but a backpack and a hope someone might care? Evelyn knew she couldn't simply take them home. She needed answers, and fast. Evelyn called Officer Ramirez, the station security guard who had been hovering near the benches. His lined face softened when he saw the children's tear-streaked cheeks. Together they pulled the station's security footage from earlier that morning. Evelyn's stomach clenched as grainy video showed a man leading Ella and Noah into the terminal. He was tall, with a hunched posture and hurried movements. He bent down briefly, spoke a few words, then walked away briskly, never once looking back. Watching the footage felt like being stabbed with a cold blade. Evelyn's eyes burned with unshed tears as she realized he hadn't lost them. He had abandoned them. Officer Ramirez shook his head. "I've been doing this for 20 years, but it never gets easier," he muttered. Evelyn asked if he recognized the man, but he didn't. They needed more. She opened the children's backpack again, combing through each pocket. A small, crumpled envelope fell out bearing their names, Ella and Noah Morgan, and an address scrawled hastily in the corner. But it wasn't a comforting lead. It was a cheap motel on the edge of the city, a place known more for drug deals and desperation than families. Evelyn's heart felt heavy with dread. She dialed the number for Child Protective Services, but even as she spoke to the woman on the other end of the line, her gaze kept drifting to the children. They were huddled together on the bench, Ella's arm wrapped protectively around her little brother. Evelyn's voice cracked as she explained the situation, giving the address from the envelope. The caseworker promised to send someone immediately. As she ended the call, Evelyn's mind swirled with dark possibilities. Had the man been their father? What could drive a parent to leave children like this? She thought back to a story she once read about a mother in Detroit who, consumed by addiction and despair, left her baby at a fire station. It was a tragic reminder that desperation can twist love into something unrecognizable. She moved to sit beside the children, choosing her words carefully. "I need to ask you something important," she said gently. "Do you know where your daddy went?" Ella's eyes went glassy. Her lips parted, but her voice was barely a whisper. "He said he had to go somewhere we couldn't follow." Noah looked up at his sister, wide-eyed and silent, and Evelyn's heart broke all over again. The raw finality of the child's words rang with a painful clarity. They hadn't been forgotten by mistake. They had been left behind on purpose. Evelyn felt anger bubbling beneath her grief. She had fought ruthless boardrooms, clawed her way up in an industry that doubted every move a woman made, but nothing compared to the rage she felt for whoever had done this to these innocent souls. She took Ella's hand and squeezed it, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your fault." Ella's lower lip trembled. Noah let out a soft whimper, and Evelyn couldn't stop the tears that slipped down her cheeks. She pulled them both into her arms, rocking them gently, as though her embrace could shield them from every hurt in the world. They sat like that for a long moment, the station's noise fading into a muffled blur around them. Evelyn thought of how many people must have walked by these children, eyes averted, telling themselves it wasn't their problem. She knew she had nearly been one of them. A bitter realization settled over her. The world doesn't just break hearts. It teaches people to look away from what makes them uncomfortable. A sudden movement caught Evelyn's eye. A man in a torn hoodie appeared at the far end of the platform, scanning the crowd with darting, suspicious eyes. He looked like the man from the video. Officer Ramirez stepped forward, but the man spotted the security guard and fled into the crowd before they could reach him. Evelyn's pulse hammered in her ears. They had almost confronted the person who abandoned Ella and Noah. Almost. The brush with the man left Evelyn shaken, but it also solidified her resolve. She had no idea how long it would take or what it would cost, but she knew she couldn't walk away now. She spoke softly to Ella and Noah, her voice cracking with emotion. "No matter how long it takes, I'll make sure you're safe." As Evelyn sat with the children, she couldn't help but reflect on a small but powerful truth. The bravest thing anyone can do is stay when it would be easier to leave. This moment wasn't about contracts or company profits. It was about choosing humanity over convenience, compassion over indifference. She thought of people she'd met who claimed they'd do the right thing if given the chance, but when faced with uncomfortable realities, they stepped back. She refused to be like them. She watched Ella rest her head on Noah's shoulder, their tiny bodies leaning together in shared fear and fragile hope. Evelyn realized she was no longer just an observer of their story. She was a part of it. She had crossed the line from stranger to protector, and she wouldn't let them down. As the caseworker's arrival grew near, Evelyn felt the weight of a promise forming in her chest. She would do everything she could to uncover the whole truth behind why these children were left alone, and she would fight to make sure they never felt so helpless again. What she couldn't yet know was how many battles still lay ahead, legal battles, emotional battles, and how deeply her life would intertwine with Ella and Noah's in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Evelyn barely slept the night after meeting Ella and Noah. She lay awake, replaying every detail, their frightened eyes, the quaver in Ella's voice, the helpless way Noah clung to his sister. By sunrise, her decision was made. She wouldn't let them become just another file in a broken system. As she dressed for the day, she traded her usual power suit for something simpler, knowing it wasn't a boardroom she'd be fighting in now, but a battle for two lives that had no one else. At the Family Services office, Evelyn met Grace Thompson, the social worker assigned to the case. Grace was in her early 40s with kind eyes and a quiet strength that spoke of years spent advocating for children no one else would fight for. She listened intently as Evelyn recounted everything she knew. "Most people walk away," Grace said softly, her gaze searching Evelyn's face. "Why didn't you?" Evelyn hesitated, her throat tight with emotion. "Because they looked at me like I was their last hope." Grace nodded slowly. "Then you need to know this won't be easy." She explained how the process worked: emergency foster placement, custody evaluations, supervised visits. Evelyn felt a flash of frustration. Was bureaucracy going to decide these children's futures more than love ever could? But Grace's eyes softened. "You're not powerless," she said. "If you want to fight for them, there are ways." Determined, Evelyn called Michael Sanders, her lawyer. Michael had been with her through corporate mergers and cutthroat negotiations, but never something like this. "Evelyn, are you sure?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. "Once you start this, you'll be opening your life to scrutiny. Everything you've built will be examined." Evelyn's voice didn't waver. "Then let them look. I won't abandon these kids." Michael explained they would need to petition for emergency guardianship. Evelyn found herself reading legal documents deep into the night, highlighting terms she didn't understand, determined to master every detail. When she met with Grace again, she asked questions with a precision born from years of corporate strategy. But this time, it wasn't about profits. It was about Ella and Noah's safety. Soon, a new unexpected obstacle emerged. A local tabloid caught wind of the story: Millionaire CEO caught with abandoned children. Kidnapping or rescue. The headline spread like wildfire online with cruel speculation about Evelyn's intentions. News vans appeared outside her apartment. Strangers sent hateful messages accusing her of exploiting the children for publicity. Evelyn's hands shook as she watched the coverage. But when she thought of Ella and Noah, their small hands reaching for hers, her resolve hardened. She released a statement through Michael explaining the truth: she found two vulnerable children and she was trying to protect them. Still, the damage was done. Public opinion had become a battlefield, and Evelyn was determined not to lose. One afternoon, during a supervised visit at a small playroom provided by Child Protective Services, Evelyn sat on the floor with Ella and Noah. Noah pushed toy cars across a faded carpet, while Ella sat beside Evelyn, quietly drawing. Suddenly, Ella looked up with eyes wide in fear. "Will they take us away from you?" she whispered. Evelyn's heart ached. She gathered Ella in her arms. "I don't know what will happen yet," she admitted honestly, her voice thick, "but I promise I will never stop trying to keep you safe." Tears rolled down Ella's cheeks as she clung to Evelyn, and even Noah crawled into her lap, resting his head against her chest. The social worker, watching from the doorway, wiped her own eyes. Evelyn remembered the stories Grace had shared: how children bounced from home to home, never sure who to trust. She thought of a girl Grace once helped, who by age 12 had been in 6 different foster homes. That girl had grown up believing that love was temporary. Evelyn refused to let Ella and Noah feel that way. She began recording every moment of her visits, documenting every interaction, every smile, every word of comfort, to build evidence that the children were safe and thriving with her. She invited teachers, neighbors, and friends to write letters affirming her character. Each signature felt like a small act of defiance against a world that doubted her intentions. Late one evening, exhausted from another day of legal meetings, Evelyn found herself at her kitchen counter, staring at a framed photo of her own mother. They had been estranged for most of Evelyn's adult life. She whispered aloud to the empty room, "I'm doing this right, aren't I?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, but powerful. It reminded her of a painful truth. We can't change the past, but we can fight like hell to make a better future. During a visit with Grace, Evelyn learned Calvin Morgan, the children's father, had reappeared. He'd been found in a nearby city and claimed he wanted his children back. But police records showed a history of domestic violence and drug abuse. Evelyn's stomach turned at the thought of Ella and Noah returning to that chaos. Grace placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "This is where it gets hardest," she said. "But it's also where it matters most." Evelyn knew then that her fight was only beginning. She wasn't just protecting Ella and Noah from an absent parent, she was standing against a system that too often prioritized biology over safety. She remembered Grace's words, "Love has to be proven by action, not DNA." The visits became more difficult as Calvin's legal team pushed to regain custody. Ella grew quieter, Noah more anxious. Evelyn spent sleepless nights researching case law, determined to find a path forward. She met with child psychologists who could testify about the trauma of abandonment, learning everything she could to give Ella and Noah a voice in a system that rarely heard children. In one heart-wrenching moment during a supervised meeting, Calvin shouted at Evelyn in front of the children, "They're mine. You think you can buy their love?" Evelyn shielded Ella and Noah behind her, her voice low but unwavering. "This isn't about money, it's about what they need, and you gave that up when you left them alone." The social worker intervened, escorting Calvin out. Evelyn held the trembling children close, vowing quietly, "No one will hurt you again." Through every obstacle, Evelyn discovered a lesson she had never learned in boardrooms. Courage isn't loud or showy, it's quiet, patient, and stubborn. It's standing firm when every voice tells you to back down. And as she looked into Ella and Noah's eyes, she realized their trust was the greatest gift she'd ever been given. The courtroom felt colder than any boardroom Evelyn had ever stepped into. The polished floors and high ceilings echoed every word, and the smell of old wood and stale coffee lingered in the air. As she sat at the petitioner's table, her hands resting on a neat stack of legal documents, Evelyn's heart beat with a slow, heavy certainty. This was not a negotiation over profits or market shares. This was a fight for the future of two fragile lives who had come to trust her in ways deeper than she ever imagined possible. Across the aisle sat Calvin Morgan, his lawyer whispering fiercely in his ear. His eyes darted to Evelyn with an anger that made her skin prickle, and even from a distance she could see his hands clenching and unclenching. The tension was almost physical, a storm waiting to break. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Judge Carter, entered with quiet authority. She scanned the documents before her, then looked directly at Evelyn. "Ms. Hart," she said, her voice calm but probing, "you've petitioned for full custody of Ella and Noah Morgan. Why did you feel it was necessary to intervene?" Evelyn swallowed hard, glancing at Ella and Noah sitting quietly beside their temporary foster mother. Their eyes were wide, scared, searching her face for reassurance. Evelyn met the judge's gaze and spoke from the deepest place of her heart. "Because when I found them, they were alone, terrified and waiting for someone who never intended to return. I can't walk away knowing what they've endured. They deserve safety, stability, and love." Calvin's lawyer rose, voice sharp. "Your Honor, Miss Hart is not a relative. She has no legal right to these children. She's a wealthy businesswoman who's trying to buy their affection and undermine a father's rights." Evelyn felt the words like slaps, but she held her head high. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Morgan," she said, turning to Calvin, "where were you the day your children were left at Grand Central Station?" Calvin shifted uncomfortably. His lawyer whispered to him again, but the judge cut in. "You will answer." He cleared his throat. I had things I needed to take care of. I plan to come back." The lie hung in the air, thin and sour. Ella's small voice broke the silence. "He said he was going far away, that we couldn't come." The courtroom froze. Evelyn looked at the judge's tears, pricking her eyes, and saw Judge Carter's expression soften almost imperceptibly. Michael Sanders, Evelyn's lawyer, called Grace Thompson to the stand. Grace testified about the state in which Evelyn had found the children, how they had been cold, hungry, and terrified. She described Evelyn's consistent presence, her unwavering commitment. "She didn't have to stay," Grace said firmly. "Most people wouldn't have, but she did." Then the courtroom watched the grainy security footage Evelyn had found with Officer Ramirez. The clip showed Calvin walking away from his children, not a hint of hesitation in his stride. Gasps rippled through the gallery as the footage ended. Calvin's face turned pale, and his lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge called a brief recess. Evelyn stepped outside to the courthouse hallway, her knees weak. She found a quiet corner and sank onto a bench, her head in her hands. Memories of late-night story times, Ella's small hand reaching for hers, Noah's quiet giggles as they built Lego towers, all flooded back. She knew she was fighting not just for custody, but for every bedtime, every scraped knee, every morning hug they would share. When the court reconvened, Evelyn felt a shift in the room. Judge Carter's voice was firm, but not unkind. She spoke of the legal standards for custody, the child's best interest above all. She outlined Calvin's pattern of instability and absence, contrasting it with Evelyn's efforts. Then she addressed Evelyn directly. "This court must consider whether you can provide not just materially but emotionally." Evelyn rose, hands trembling but her voice steady. "I know I've never been a mother before. I know I've made mistakes in my own life. But I will show up for them every single day. I will fight for them. I will love them. And I will never, ever leave." The courtroom fell silent. Even Calvin stared at his hands, saying nothing. The judge took a deep breath and began reading her decision, each word clear and deliberate. She acknowledged the difficulty of separating biological ties from emotional commitment, but concluded that Ella and Noah's safety and emotional well-being must come first. As such, she said, her voice softening, "It is the ruling of this court that Evelyn Hart be granted full and permanent custody of Ella and Noah Morgan." The words washed over Evelyn like a wave. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she heard Ella's soft sob, saw Noah's eyes widen in wonder. She knelt as the children ran into her arms, their small bodies trembling with relief. She held them close, her face buried in their hair, whispering over and over, "We're going home. We're going home." Around them, even court officials wiped away tears. Michael rested a reassuring hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Grace stood near the doorway, her eyes shining with quiet pride. In that courtroom, Evelyn learned a truth she would carry forever. Sometimes love demands a fight, and the fiercest battles are not for ourselves, but for those who can't fight alone. She realized that the power of presence, the courage to stay, to be consistent, to love without condition, was stronger than any argument or wealth. And as she gathered Ella and Noah to leave the courtroom, she knew their story was only beginning, that healing was a journey they would now walk together. But she also knew that they would never again face it alone. The first morning, Evelyn woke up with Ella and Noah under her roof, felt like stepping into a dream she never knew she had. The sun streamed through the kitchen window as she fumbled to make pancakes, burning the first 2 batches before Ella's giggle broke the tension. Noah climbed onto a stool beside her, his small hands clutching the edge of the counter as he watched every move with wide, curious eyes. There was something so heartbreakingly pure in their presence, a quiet wonder that turned her sterile penthouse into a home, bursting with new life. She took them shopping for new clothes, letting them pick their favorite colors. Ella chose bright yellow dresses, and Noah insisted on a tiny blue baseball cap he refused to take off. When they reached the checkout line, the cashier smiled at them with a warmth Evelyn had rarely experienced in her busy life. It was such a small moment, yet it felt monumental, a stranger recognizing them as a family. At night, bedtime became their sacred ritual. Evelyn sat on the floor between their twin beds reading stories until Noah's eyelids drooped and Ella's breathing slowed into sleep. Some nights, Ella would whisper questions into the dark. "Are you still here?" she'd ask, voice fragile. Evelyn would squeeze her hand. "I'll always be here," she promised. The first time she said it, she wasn't sure if she fully believed she could keep that vow. But each night, repeating those words, she felt them settle deeper into her soul until they became the very truth of her existence. She found a child therapist who specialized in trauma to help guide them through the lingering shadows of abandonment. Their sessions revealed both the resilience and the scars the children carried. Noah flinched at loud voices. Ella had nightmares about being left alone in crowds. Evelyn learned to soothe them, to build routines that made them feel safe, to celebrate small victories, like the first night Ella slept soundly, or the day Noah laughed so hard he couldn't catch his breath. One evening, while they were drawing together at the kitchen table, Ella handed Evelyn a crayon picture of 3 stick figures, a tall woman holding hands with a little girl and boy. "That's us," she said shyly. Evelyn's eyes stung with tears as she studied the drawing. It was simple, but it was everything she had fought for. She hung it on the fridge like the most precious work of art she'd ever owned. Slowly, the fear in the children's eyes gave way to trust. Noah started leaving his backpack by the front door without needing it as a constant comfort. Ella began humming to herself as she played, a lightness in her voice that hadn't been there before. The once silent, sterile halls of Evelyn's home now rang with laughter and squeals, the echoes of a family being built from the quiet ruins of heartbreak. Friends and colleagues who once questioned Evelyn's decision now marveled at the transformation in her. At first, some still thought she'd made an impulsive choice, that she'd soon tire of the burden. But each time they visited, they were greeted by children who clung to Evelyn with unguarded love. Even Michael, her lawyer, who had worried for her reputation, confessed during a dinner at her apartment, "I've never seen you happier. They needed you, but maybe you needed them even more." Evelyn learned an invaluable lesson during those first weeks of being a parent. Family isn't defined by blood, but by the moments you refuse to walk away. She saw how choosing to stay over and over, especially when things were hard, was what gave Ella and Noah the foundation they needed to believe in love again. In a world quick to abandon, showing up became her quiet revolution. As spring turned to summer, Evelyn took the children to Central Park, where they picnicked under the sprawling oaks. Noah chased pigeons, shrieking with joy. Ella stretched out on the blanket, eyes closed, soaking in the warmth of the sun. Evelyn watched them, a profound peace settling over her. She realized healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about creating new memories stronger than the old wounds. That afternoon, as they walked home hand in hand, Ella glanced up with a smile that melted Evelyn's heart. "You're really ours now, aren't you?" she asked. Evelyn bent down, cupping Ella's face. "Yes," she whispered, voice thick with tears, "I'm yours, forever." In that moment, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that the greatest success of her life wasn't measured in deals closed or accolades won, but in the simple everyday moments of love that proved a family could be chosen, healed, and made whole again. Evelyn Hart's journey began on an ordinary morning in a crowded train station where she could have simply kept walking like everyone else. Instead, she paused. She saw 2 small, terrified children and chose compassion over convenience. What started as a moment of kindness quickly became a life-altering commitment, leading her through nights of doubt, days of relentless legal battles, and moments of heart-wrenching uncertainty. Through every tearful bedtime story and every step into an intimidating courtroom, Evelyn discovered not only her own capacity for love, but the profound power of being present for someone who has no one else. She transformed from a woman who measured success by boardroom wins into a mother who found true meaning in sticky pancake breakfasts, bedtime whispers, and the trust reflected in two young faces that had learned to believe again. This story reminds us that family is not defined by blood, but by the people who show up and stay, especially when it's difficult. Evelyn's willingness to risk her reputation, her comfort, and her carefully constructed life taught us that the greatest acts of love are rarely easy. They often demand patience, vulnerability, and a determination to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Ella and Noah, once abandoned and broken-hearted, blossomed into joyful children, not because Evelyn was perfect, but because she was steadfast. She taught them that promises can be kept, that love can be unconditional, and that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds. The moral of this story is simple but powerful. True strength lies in kindness and choosing to stand by others when it would be easier to turn away. Compassion doesn't mean fixing everything overnight. It means refusing to leave people alone in their pain. In our own lives, we can apply this lesson by being patient with loved ones, by offering help when we see someone in need, and by remembering that even small acts of support can change the course of someone's life. Let Evelyn's story inspire you to look beyond the surface to recognize when someone needs a hand to hold, and to never underestimate the impact of simply staying. If you found this story moving, please subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. Your support gives us the motivation to keep bringing you powerful, heartfelt stories that inspire and remind us all of the good still left in the world. Thank you for watching, and we can't wait to see you in our next story.